I'm Steve Brule with Studio Brule, and I'm here with Bettina Arndt from Australia, who is interested in the topic of rape culture, particularly on campuses in universities in Australia. And Bettina, recently, I guess last week, you were attacked by the mainstream media for your views in a particular article around the topic of rape culture. Can you explain a little bit of that for the audience?
Yeah, well, it's been a very exciting week because we had the results of we have a human rights commission here that spent $1 million trying to prove there was a rape culture on campuses. Very similar story to what happened in America, where they had, a really dubious survey that led to all the Obama taking action and forcing the universities to have tribunals and so on. We're heading down this route. The movie The Hunting Ground showed on every campus in Australia, trying to beat up the idea that we have this real problem on campuses. And our university spent $1 million giving money to the Human Rights Commission to do this survey, which was supposed to prove what a big problem we had. And last week, the results were released, which was truly hilarious because they found nothing. The results were so reassuring. If you like the idea of our campuses being safe spaces, excuse me, but of course, from the activist point of view, it was a big disappointment because they didn't find a rape culture. They found 1.6% of women over a 2-year period had been sexually assaulted using a definition that included everything under the sun. I mean, it included being tricked into sex against their will, all that regret sex type stuff. The broadest possible definition, 1.6% over 2 years. And I said to them, why are you using 2 years? And they said, because 1 year figure just didn't stand up at all. I mean, it was such a pathetic figure, they couldn't even mention the 0.8, which would have been for the 1 year period. And all they found, so they beat up this idea that there's massive problem because of harassment, because they really couldn't talk about the sexual assault. And 1 in 2 women being sexually harassed, and that turned out to be mainly being stared at. I mean, or reacting to sexual jokes or reacting to a sexual comment, but most of it was staring. And yet we had every media organization just about in the whole country saying, oh, these results are appalling, big, crisis on campus. We have to do something about this. We had every vice chancellor parading around saying, this is shocking. We're going to implement all these, we're going to have rape, sexual assault people on every campus. We're going to have a 24-hour hotline. I mean, it was talk about fake news. And I mean, it was a most extraordinary thing because I wrote this article on the day the results came out, spelling out what they actually did show. I mean, even those women who were claimed to be sexually assaulted, 40% of them said they didn't do anything about it because it wasn't serious enough. We're obviously talking about, consent cases here, or cases where women probably had too much to drink, you name it. I mean, they didn't feel it was serious enough, and 40% said they didn't need help. So we're not talking about, the stranger leaping out of the bushes. We're talking about rape cases, which the women themselves realized weren't that serious. 40% of them said they weren't serious. So I wrote all about this, and then it was the most extraordinary thing because as I said, the whole rest of the media is running the propaganda line saying this is terrible. And then because I wrote about it and went on television and talked about it, then I got ferociously attacked by the left-wing media as, being a rape apologist and so on. So it's gone on. But it's been very interesting for me because I've been talking about this topic for years now. And I'm getting an enormous response from people across Australia, in universities particularly, saying you're totally right, but we don't dare talk about this. Students saying, lots of women students, which I'm very happy about, a lot of young women writing me saying, what can we do about this? We don't agree with this. We think, the feminists are taking over our universities and doing our universities a lot of harm. So a lot of people wanting to know how can we tackle this. And I'd be interested if you have any of the people listening have any ideas about this. How do we challenge this rape culture narrative? What can we do about it?
Well, like I think from my point of view, like any propaganda lies, it's a long battle, but you have to beat it with the truth, and
Yeah,
you need to protect people and defend people who do have the courage to speak the truth. We need to defend them with facts and statistics. We need to
yeah,
defeat their arguments when they use statistics to lie. And I think when I was listening to you talk there, I remembered, I think, echoes of the Miss Magazine report from was it the early 80s or late 70s? And the author of that report even admitted that the statistics are artificially high because of the inclusion of these kind of minor inconveniences that by conflating rape, which at that time was defined as basically real rape. I call it real rape now, where you're a forcible act.
yeah,
They conflate it with inconveniences like uncomfortable joke or a cat call or something. When you conflate all these things together, of course, I mean, you could get to 100% pretty quickly if you conflate enough uncomfortable things.
yeah, yeah.
But
And
sticking with
well,
facts
of
is
course,
the way to go.
what we're really talking about on campus is a lot of alcohol-driven stuff. I noticed one of Trump's people was in trouble the other day for saying, most of these cases involve people being pissed. That's what it is, and
Right.
women making bad decisions to go up to the room with someone when they're half drunk. I mean, which is not that's not saying it's totally reasonable for a guy to jump on her in that situation. Of course, it's not. But what
Well,
bothers
no,
me,
let's halt there for a second. Let's halt on that particular example because
yeah,
when people who argue that shouldn't be included, I think they really mean a woman who is drunk and a man who is drunk, and they both make the decision together. Whereas in today's culture, they interpret that the man's decision is consent, the woman's is not consent because of the same amount of drunkenness. They don't
that's,
mean that the two drunken people go to a room and then the man actually physically forces himself on her. I think that's, and everybody believes that to be a rape.
yeah,
But
that's right.
I think there's a serious argument, a serious problem when you define that consensual sex while after a few beers or whatever is actually rape. I don't
Yeah,
buy that. I
and
think that's
the
ridiculous.
woman has no agency in that. That if two people are drunk and they end up groping or having sex or whatever, it's always the male responsibility. That's the line they're pushing. One of the interesting things is the result of all of this. Even prior to the data being released last week, the universities were lining up all these measures, saying we know there's going to be a big problem coming out of this research, blah blah blah, and they introduced these sexual assault counselors and so on. But they also introduced compulsory education classes for all staff and students across Australia on sexual consent. And of course, part of that is
Is
going
this
to be
directly as a result of this particular study coming out?
yeah. I mean, they've been preparing for this study. They've been beating up this study for months, saying we know the results are going to be shocking. They had
So
a union.
hold on a second. They
Uh,
say they know these results are going to be shocking from what point of view? Shockingly low or shockingly high, they
shockingly
believe?
high. Shockingly high. I mean, there's been a really deliberate campaign here. And it started off with we had a union of students, our students' union, released a study showing, huge numbers of students have been sexually assaulted. That's what led to all of this. And of course, that study was self-selected, included lots of incidents off campus. I mean, it was dubious in every way. 73% of students been sexually assaulted. And so this
Hold
human
on a
rights,
second again. Sorry to keep interrupting you here, but you
that's
said
okay, you can jump in.
73%. I mean, I understood from previous stats that it was something like 1 in 3, which is roughly 30% or 33%. Now they're
Yeah.
touting 73%.
That was a union of students. So it included harassment and assault. They always conflate the two. And then they talk,
Of course, and
about,
harassment is so broad.
you know, but that's how it all started. And then they persuaded the Human Rights Commission to do this survey. They released the data. which was, from their point of view, I think very disappointing. From a logical person's point of view, it should have been a celebration that we had relatively safe campuses in Australia. I wrote to vice chancellors, the heads of our universities across the country before these results came out, and said, because they were already out there saying, as I said, that the results are going to be shocking. The universities were given their results ahead of time, and they chose to present them as if they're dire, worrying data. And even before the Human Rights Commission results came out, they were out, introducing all these new measures. And I wrote to them and said, aren't you nervous? Australia is incredibly dependent on full fee paying overseas students. That's what's propping up the whole system. The fact that we have a disproportionate number of overseas students who pay fees that are far in excess of what Australian students pay. And I said, if you're going to beat up this idea of a rape culture, why would families in India or Malaysia or, the Asian countries we really depend on to support our university system, why would they send their daughters here? Why would they send their sons here? And
I think the answer, I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but I think the answer to this revolves around the fact that I don't think anybody anywhere in the world deep down really believes this. It's an issue that nobody wants to argue against, but nobody believes.
Yeah, nobody believes.
Nobody would send to a university like that, obviously, right? I wouldn't.
Yes, I was talking to some people in India about this last week, and they were saying there's a college, it's an MBA course famous MBA course in India, where there was some rape scares in the local town, which turned out to be false, but they just lost all their female students as a result of that. It went from being 50-50 down to 90% male and 10% female. And so, I mean, I think you'd like to think that no one believes this stuff, but when you're sitting in a country trying to work out where to send your daughter, you might choose not to go to a country which is beating up all this nonsense.
Well, and maybe I should correct it. Nobody in the West really believes that.
That's right.
I'll give you a little anecdote. Years ago, I think it was 2014, 3 years ago, and Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Janice Fiamengo came to give a lecture. And her topic was, she had two topics. At Queen's, it was feminism's got it all wrong. And the next day at Ottawa U, her topic was on rape culture, how it's, not real. And she was protested, or people tried to block her from speaking and all the rest of that. And the feminists at the Queen's campus were arguing that Kingston is the rape capital of Canada, sexual assault capital of Canada. And it was so dangerous on campus that women are fearing, there's a rapist behind every street post. And so, but I've been around Queens. I lived there for 11 years, up till just last year. And I've been on Queens campus all hours of the day, night, whatever. And I've never seen a woman afraid. They're walking the streets at 1 and 2 in the morning, partying, and nobody on there is the slightest bit afraid. And I also looked into the statistics for rape and sexual assault in Kingston, Ontario, and there had never been a reported rape on Queen's campus. Yeah. Through the police statistics. And let me correct there. There might have been one in the previous 10 years. I can't remember exactly how far back the statistics go, but it was a fair bit, like 10, 12 years. And there was only one, or maybe it was two, this was several years ago, rapes in Kingston within the previous 2 years. Total, in the whole town of 125,000 people. And yet, the feminists on campus were propping this up as the sexual assault and rape capital of Canada.
Yeah. Oh, no, look at that.
Driving the fear.
I mean, the thing is that they're so desperate to ignore the real statistics. We have a very good organisation called the New South Wales, our local state Bureau of Crime Statistics, really reputable. And I got them to pull out the figures on the number of reported rapes on campus and how they compare to elsewhere in the state. and you are 100 times more likely to be raped elsewhere, or to make a report of rape than you were on a university campus. You know, we have our big government organisation, the Bureau of Statistics. And the funny thing is, their survey, which covers sexual assault, found 0.7% of women report assaults in any 1 year. And that's exactly what the Human Rights Commission came, and they got 0.8%. But they spent $1 million and got exactly the same result, just about, as the official data has always shown. And they were desperate because they.
And what you touched on right there, the $1 million, there that you touched on, that's a drop in the bucket for these things. And that's where the issue, why this issue is so pernicious, is that there is billions of dollars behind, that's dependent upon the public believing there's a problem, a rape culture problem, especially on university campuses.
Yeah. But it's also, I mean, of course, as Janice always says, it's all part of creating this anti-male culture. And they're targeting particular areas that they think are all about, you know, masculine privilege. We have a particular college, you know, a live-in college on one of our campuses called St. Paul's at Sydney University, which has, you know, produced innumerable famous men, judges, you know, people who've done very well in government, well-known leaders. And of course, this is a mighty big scalp from the feminist point of view. If they could get St. Paul's, which is a male-only college, if they could take that down, they'd be dancing in the streets. And they've got the Vice Chancellor of Sydney University, that's the university where this college is, and he's announced that he, privately to people, that he's out to get St. Paul's, and he's trying to get the government to introduce new legislation to take over control of that college. And of course, one of the things they're doing in colleges across Australia is trying to stop the boys from singing, when they singing bawdy songs, you know, singing slightly sexy songs, which has always been part of the tradition and orientate, you know, when the first week of university, they go out and they all get pissed and they drink this. And of course, now this is totally offensive behavior. And there was this poor boy on television last year who was in trouble for singing one of these songs, and he was groveling on camera saying, "I'm so sorry, I didn't realize." And the really funny thing is, one of the lines in the song he was singing was something about tickling a woman's clit. And I mean, we've been trying to get men to tickle our clits for generations. And they thought this was offensive.
And now they want to stop it.
They want to stop it.
You know what?
I mean,
you know what this puts me in mind of, Bettina, is you know, years ago, and I don't know exactly how and when this started, but the Catholic Church, of course, wanted to clamp down in Ireland, and that's they clamped down on dancing because this was somehow untoward, and so that's where the step dancing comes from, of course, right? This is so much of a prudish and ideologically prudish sort of clampdown.
Yeah, and particularly, I mean, it is an interesting alliance of the Conservatives with these left-wing protesters, and it comes out as this sort of anti-male rhetoric, anti-male sexuality. You know, it's all about, I mean, I find it most extraordinary that the women feminists are embracing this idea that anything to do with sex is bad, anything to do with male sexuality is offensive. I'm just a bit...
It is weird, for sure. But it seems to me it's part of the power play, right? I've lost you. Your mic is...
Oh, there you go. Okay, here I am. Yeah, it is all about power, and we've got a lot of people with a lot of investment in this. The Hunting Ground Project is right behind all this. And they gave the funding for this initial seed funding for this big survey. They're being quoted in government documents as one of the references being used for preparing guidelines for use on our campuses. I mean, it's just shocking. This propaganda organization is treated as legitimate research by our whole university sector. And, you know, that we've got vice chancellors proudly being associated with the hunting ground and saying, you know, that they're joining with the hunting ground to show this movie on campuses and so on. So that's all part of this story too. But I'd really love to hear from anybody who has any ideas about how to tackle it. So maybe people could get in touch with me. I've lost you, Steve. Can you hear me? You. Hello. Hello?
Are we live?
I can hear you.
Okay, I don't know what happened here, if it happened on my end or your end or what.
You froze for a while there. That's okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry. We're back now. Apologize to the viewers.
Here we go.
Must be a connection on my side. So can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you, Steve. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Where were we at, Bettina, when we
Well, I just want to say, one of the things we're trying to do is get all these kids together who are objecting to this, the students, and work out a best way of protesting. And they're talking about petitions. But one of the things I think might be really effective is for them to refuse to go to these courses. Because these sexual consent courses are all about demonizing men and demonizing male sexuality, and they don't have a word about female agency. They don't say anything to women about their responsibility not to get so pissed they can't give consent. And rightly, I've got women coming to me saying this is not fair to just put all the responsibility on men. And I think it'd be a fantastic thing if across Australia we could have members of staff at universities and also the young women saying we don't want our sexuality defined in that way. If we're going to talk about sexual consent, let's talk about responsibility for both men and women. And let's have a real protest around that. I think that could stir up a few feathers. So I'd be interested. Anyone listening to this who wants to get on board this sort of protest, could you get in touch with me? Steve, I've got all this stuff. We might put it up on the low bar. I've got a big article summarising what's happening that I wrote recently. And it's all on my website, but maybe you could give the references as well.
Certainly. If you send me all the links, I'll put them in the description of the video after we terminate here. Bettina, I want to just talk a little bit about the people criticizing you in the media recently. Did you analyze their criticisms, respond in any way? Of course, they're claiming that you're a right-wing rape apologist and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I've been that for a long time. They're now using.
But isn't it ironic as a sex therapist and they're calling you a rape apologist?
I know. Well, they have enormous trouble working out how to position me anymore. But no, I mean they're now calling me a contrarian, which, you know, I'm taking a very considered view on a whole range of issues. It's not just that I like going against the mainstream, but I'm certainly very happy to take on this ridiculous feminist lobby that is controlling so much of our media, and yet so few people are willing to discuss it. They all write to me privately and tell me they agree with me, but when I was looking for people to quote in my article last week, boy, were expert after expert ran scared, and they were too nervous of standing up against this massive lobby group.
It's not just rape culture, though. This is anything which opposes feminism in general, that people are scared to put their heads above the parapet over it. Feminists are running ranshod over the whole Western culture. It's in business. We talked about it today with the tech business, earlier on today with the Liberty Bells. It's in government. It's in the university systems. It's everywhere. It's in the education system. Where Janice talks about this on university campuses, people are afraid to oppose feminism, wherever it is. That in itself volumes to the oppressive and destructive nature of this enormous monster that's grown. Feminism,
Yeah.
the monster.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's particularly worrying is that the sectors of our media that are required under law to present a balanced argument, namely our public broadcaster, which gets government funding, and it's part of their charter to present both sides of these sort of arguments, they're systematically promoting the feminist view on issue after issue. I couldn't get on any ABC program when these results came out.
But Bettina, yeah, I'm not surprised at that at all, because feminists and the women's studies program, they have been encouraging and training feminists to go into those industries. Feminists dominate the media. They dominate the media.
Yeah.
Within the media, they dominate well, I don't know if they don't dominate government, but they tend to gravitate towards social policy jobs. There's a huge growth of feminism in law. In Canada, Canadian law schools, there's a women in law and feminist law courses at every law school. University of Toronto, the biggest law school, and we have feminist judges on the Supreme Court of Canada.
Yep.
This is not a small issue. It's not. Yeah.
You're right.
Sorry, it kind of got a little off track there.
I gave a paper summarising the situation in Australia at the keynote speech at the International Conference on Men's Issues, which was in June in Australia. And I went through a whole range of issues like that, where I've been battling against feminist ideology, domestic violence, rape, boys' education. There are issue after issue where males' rights, there's no question of equality. It's all about disadvantaging men, and promoting women's rights at the expense of men. That's what it's all about. And you're right, it's across the board. And when I was preparing that paper, it was really rather depressing, looking back on working for 40 years in the media, fighting issue after issue, and we have gone backwards on almost every single one of them. We had professor giving a lecture about our rape laws and the influence of two particular feminist law professors in removing basic protections under the law for men accused of rape in one state.
That's accelerating today. That's accelerating today as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here there's a new law, in Canada, Bill C-51, I think it's called, to disallow a defendant in a sexual assault charge or rape charge to use social media, the accuser's social media, as defense. And this came about, this was proposed as a result of the John Gomeshi. Gomeshi successfully defended himself against these charges on the basis using the social media. His opponents didn't realize he saved this from years and years and years past.
And of course, the Columbia mattress girl, I'm sure everyone knows that story.
Oh, yeah.
I wrote
that one's
and of course, I wrote about that in my introduction to this whole kerfuffle this week around the new figures. But because the funny thing about that is, for those who don't know it, we're talking about a case where a girl accused it was a German student, as it happened, of anal rape and tried to strangle her and so on. She accused him 7 months after the incident allegedly took place. There was, as you say, a string of Facebook messages to and from the girl and the boy, the young man, in which 2 days later he invites her to his room and she said she'd love to come. A month later she's saying she loves him. A whole lot of very positive messages from her, and then suddenly she turns around and accuses him of rape. It was investigated by Columbia University, and which is interesting for me because my son went to Columbia, so it's all very familiar to me. And Columbia said there was no. He said they said that the investigation proved there was no case, and she then carried her mattress around the university for 3 years. And
that's harassment. That's intimidation and harassment right there, and it pretty much destroyed this guy's life. It got national attention. The damn woman went to the White House on the invitation of Obama. Is what you call abuse at the institutional level. The White House itself, within the U.S., abusing this guy or aiding and abetting somebody to abuse this guy. Believe that. That is one of the biggest signs of an oppressive, destructive, hate-filled regime that you can possibly have. The very top.
She took her mattress to the White House. Did she take the mattress to the White House?
I don't know if she did that. I don't know. But she went to the White House, and she was invited to the White House and was feted by a senator as well.
Wow.
The whole thing is ridiculous.
And of course, she was given credit towards her arts degree for this as performance art. She took the mattress to graduation.
She carried the mattress on stage for graduation. Yeah, and the guy himself, who everybody on campus knows him, had to walk up for his.
Anyway, finally, he's taken action against the university, and he's won. And the University of Columbia had to do a big payout. We don't know how much. But the funniest thing here, this is the week that payout was announced, we had at our national government, our Parliament House in Australia, all these alleged rape victims with mattresses. They obviously don't read the international news.
Hold on a second. Can you repeat that for me? I'm not sure I heard that right.
That's fantastic. So this was all in preparation of this survey I've been talking about. They all saying, shocking rape culture on campus. And all these alleged rape victims were carrying their mattresses about 4 days after the Columbia settlement had been announced. And I just thought that was so delicious.
It is, but I don't think the feminists saw it that way. They probably still claim it to be a victory and a powerful statement and all the rest of that. They don't have the subtlety to see that kind of irony.
Yeah. But the funniest thing is, what I was also writing about is the fact that the writing is on the wall in America. What a mistake this has all been for the universities, because they are paying out huge numbers of settlements like that to young men who've been wrongly accused. They're spending $700 million a year running these tribunals, which just simply end up getting them into trouble. Because if the women don't get a guilty verdict, if the women don't manage to win, they then sue the university. And all these men who are wrongly accused sue the university. And, there are so many cases in the pipeline now. So when I was talking to these vice chancellors, I said, surely you guys talk to people in America occasionally. These heads of our universities are always swanning off to conferences, international conferences. It is impossible to believe they don't know what's happening there and that they think this is a sensible way to go. And yet that's exactly what they're doing. They're heading down the same
I'm not sure
way.
They are. And I think they'll continue to do that. And I'm not even sure that that's going to make any difference, because the public, the media is so powerfully influencing the public that the public believes there's a problem with rape and sexual assaults. The public does. And so the money will continue to pour in, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. See, that's the question. If we did a survey, what would the public say? Everywhere I go, people come up to me and say, you're quite right. People say my kids went through university and never had a problem. People know it's not true. And that's what I think the majority of people. Do you think most men believe there's a rape culture on campus? No.
I can't believe anybody really believes that, but I'm pessimistic because our culture, both men and women are reluctant to take any stand against a stand presented as protective of women, no matter what that is.
Yeah.
Because our culture is our gynocentric for hundreds of years. Our entire culture is built upon a presumption of gynocentrism, that it's men's role to protect and provide for women. Despite all of this claims for changing society and empowerment and whatever, the fundamental, and even feminists belie this fact when they say men can stop rape. They're saying we can't. They're saying it's men's job to do more, and feminists belie this fact whenever they say, and every feminist study concludes the same thing: more needs to be done for women. Well, think about that statement for a second. More needs to be done for women by who? By men. Yeah. It's a gynocentric statement. All these things are gynocentric statements, and they cut to the core here is that at the end of the day, both men and women believe that it's men's job to provide for and protect for and elevate women.
Yeah. Well, see, I still have faith in ordinary people getting it. We had this on the night these results were released. There was a big television show. It's the 7:30 report. It's the big current affairs show. And a woman was on there talking about, you know, there were a couple of so-called rape cases. And one in particular, the girl said that she got incredibly drunk and the boy was drunk too, and they staggered off to the room together. And, you know, and the number of people who watched that who said, why aren't we talking about girls drinking too much and drinking to the point where they're incapable of making a proper decision around consent? Why isn't that part of the story? Years ago, funnily enough, probably 20 years ago, I was asked to be a guest producer on one of our top documentary programs on this ABC, on the public broadcaster. And I did a program on no doesn't always mean no. And there were huge protests about the fact that I was even making this program. But what I was talking about was this issue of sexual consent. And part of the problem is that women have to take responsibility for their actions. And I for that program, I talked to lots of women about the fact that they deliberately get pissed because it absolves them of responsibility for making the decision. And they will admit to doing that, oh, I just got carried away. Oh, it just happened. And then sometimes they will turn around later and say, well, that was rape. I didn't want to do that. But there are many women who will acknowledge that they're not giving clear signals. They're not making a clear decision about whether they want to have sex or not. They're ambivalent, and therefore they deliberately drink to the point that they don't make a proper decision.
Yeah.
Now, why
it's self-protective? It means that they don't have to, like you said, I think the key point you just mentioned there is that it absolves them of responsibility. Feminists want women to be absolved of responsibility in everything.
Yeah, but there are lots of women who don't. And funnily enough, I found this paper, which is a Canadian paper, and I'm going to dig this out, but which did work on actually found the most effective way of influencing these date rape cases is to encourage women to make better decisions. Encourage women to say no earlier, to speak about whether they want to have sex or not, to engage in negotiation around that clearly with the men early in the evening, before they get drunk, and that is what really makes the difference. Not just turning around.
I agree. That's rational. That's logical.
I know.
That's fact-based, and it's not going to work with feminists.
I know, but that's what I think we have to be lobbying for. And if we get young women in universities to go in there and say, we're happy to be part of a sexual consent course, provided it talks about our responsibility too. Now, I think that'd be a really powerful message, and that's what I'm going to be working on for the next few months.
Well, that's terrific. I mean, this is a big topic, obviously. It's a big topic not because there's a big problem with rape or rape culture or rape on campuses. It's a big topic because there's so much power, there's so much at risk, there's so much at stake, the relationships between young and men and women, the destruction of male lives for false reasons. And it's huge. I mean, just the accusation alone is enough to get a man destroyed. Recently, just yesterday, in fact, a friend of mine's son exited the house. in the U.S. And his wife was angry at him, yelling at him in the street. A group of people in their neighborhood saw this, and the man was beat to a pulp, had to be taken to the hospital because they assumed he had assaulted her. There's no mark on her. The police now have him in protective custody because the people in the street automatically believed that just because the woman was angry and yelling that he had done something wrong, they beat him up.
Yeah.
His teeth are gone, cut up, he's in the hospital.
I know. I mean, you're right. I mean, this is the big issue, isn't it? This a whole culture designed to protect women for good reason initially that has been now so manipulated and misused to punish men.
I'm not even sure it's for good reason anymore. A lot of these guys probably saw this as an opportunity to demonstrate their manliness or their ability to protect women to the people viewing or the people they knew who were also on the street, you know? It's the whole situation with these kinds of incidents is really complex. It's filled with all kinds of ulterior motives.
I know, just shocking stuff. But just one thing I didn't mention. I was talking to Janice Fimengo about the she on some of the videos she'd made with you has talked about in the campus rape situation, the young men who are particularly vulnerable are nerdy blokes, are awkward males who don't fit in. And I actually found some interesting data showing that this applies, of course, to, say, black men in a predominantly white culture on some campuses, and also Asian students. And so I actually found some interesting data showing that Asian students in one college were the ones who were being particularly targeted for accusations of unfair accusations of rape. And so that, when I said, when I was talking to the vice chancellors here, this is one of the issues I really raised, that there are males who, because they're a little bit awkward, because they're not part of the mainstream culture, are not going to fit in. And they're precisely the students in Australia who are propping up our whole system, because they're the ones who are coming from overseas and they're the full fee paying ones. And it is a crazy thing to make these boys particularly vulnerable to unfair accusations of rape.
No, absolutely. I agree. It's a serious topic. We're going to have many, many discussions on this. And also, I should mention to viewers here, I've alluded to it in the past, Janice Fimengo and I are commencing a full feature-length documentary on the topic of rape culture, not just on university campuses, but the general topic of rape culture.
Yeah.
So look for that in the future. Bettina, we're coming on 45 minutes. I know you're busy. Is there any other topics or points you want to bring to the fore right away?
No, I think that's fine. We'll follow it up some other day. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, thank you, viewers, for joining us, and we'll try to put all the links that we discussed into the low bar after this is live. Bettina, thanks once again. I hope you can join me again soon.
I'd love to. Okay.
Continue our discussions.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night now.
Good night.